Hello, this is the Kevin's Bookstore, and today we're gonna read the Magic Trio's Fact Checker Ghost. Chapter 2 America's Most Haunted. There has never been another city quite like New Orleans. Parts of the city have buildings that look like those in France and Spain. That's because before New Orleans became part of the United States in 1812, it was first owned by France and later by Spain. Over the years, people from Haiti and Africa also settled in the city. They brought a rich treasure of African folklore with them. Another gift they gave New Orleans was a type of music called jazz, which has its roots in African music. The air in New Orleans is hot and damp. The city sits between the Mississippi River and Lake Pontchartrain. Because of this, there is a huge danger of floods. Houses are sometimes built high off the ground for protection. Earthen banks called levees act as walls to keep the city from flooding. All over New Orleans, creepy-looking hanging moss droops from the trees. Crumbling old mansions line many of the streets. New Orleans is the perfect setting for some great ghost stories. In fact, some people call it the most haunted city in America. Cities of the dead. Folks in New Orleans call their graveyards cities of the dead. That's because they have to bury the dead above ground. The earth is so soggy that in rainy weather, coffins buried underground used to float to the surface. To solve this problem, many people are buried in tombs or in structures called vaults. Visitors walk down winding paths overgrown with moss and weeds. Silent tombs sit on either side of the walkways. During the holidays, candles cast ghostly shadows on the graves. New Orleans has over 42 cemeteries, but St. Louis Cemetery number 1 is one of the most famous. It is said to be haunted by the ghost of an African American woman named Mary Leavue. When Mary died in the 18th, many believed she had magical powers. People said she could summon up spirits and even make magic potions. Legend has it that Mary's ghost appeared as either a crow or a big black dog that runs through the cemetery. Sometimes visitors mark the tomb where Mary is supposed to be buried with 3 large X's in hopes of having good luck. And for extra good luck, they turn around 3 times as well. Just remember, it's against the law to mark up the tombs. Ghost of the French Quarter. The oldest and most famous part of New Orleans is called the French Quarter. The French built many buildings there before Louisiana became part of the United States. New Orleans has a law that no one can tear down any of these wonderful but sometimes spooky old buildings. When you wander through the French Quarter, it's not hard to see why many famous ghost stories take place there. Mary Leavue lived in the French Quarter. People say that her ghost drifts down St. Anne Street dressed in a white gown with a handkerchief tied in 7 knots around her neck. A man once claimed Mary's ghost hit him in the nose when he was in the drugstore. The victim said that her ghost asked him who she was. When he said he did not know, she gave him a good hard punch. There are other ghostly sightings in the French Quarter as well. People claim that the ghost of a woman sometimes sits on the roof of a house on Royal Street. They've named her Julie the Creole Lady. The story goes that Julie died from grief because a young Frenchman would not marry her. Julie climbed up to the roof of her house and died overnight from the cold. The Death Tree. Other famous French Quarter ghosts include those of a Turkish sultan and his family. In the 18th, the Sultan rented a huge house called the Garret Lepetri house for his big family and their servants. One dark and stormy night, intruders slipped in and murdered everyone. The murderers buried the Sultan in a shallow grave underneath the tree in the courtyard. They were never caught, and no one ever knew why they murdered the family. For years, people reported hearing Turkish music coming from the house. They also reported screams and ghostly figures around the tree. Ghost of the Civil War. Another haunted house in the French Quarter belonged to General Beauregard, who fought in the Civil War in the mid-18th. Folks say that around 2 o'clock in the morning the ghost of the general and his soldiers haunt the ballroom. At first the men appear in fine uniforms, then suddenly their clothes turn into bloody rags. Terrible wails cover their bodies, and the sound of battle began to rumble through the house. Today, General Bigord's house is a museum that is not open at night. Jean Lefty's blacksmith shop. Jean Lefty, a pirate, really looked the part. He was tall, dark, and handsome, and was popular with the ladies. But most of all, Jean was daring. In the early 18th, he and his band of pirates attacked and robbed ships up and down the coast from Texas to Louisiana. Yet Gene has a good side too. He and his brother helped the United States in naval battles against the British in the War of 1812 and in the Battle of New Orleans in 1815. In 1823, Jean Lefty attacked a Spanish ship. In the return fire, Jean was wounded and died. He was buried at sea. Jean and his brother owned a blacksmith shop in the French Quarter. There is a rumor that he buried his treasure there under the fireplace. Today, Leftys blacksmith shop is a popular bar. It's one of the oldest buildings in the French Quarter. Inside the dark and crumbling rooms, candles flicker. On cool days, a fire in the fireplace gives off a dim glow. People have noticed a lot of strange happenings at Lefty's. Jean himself sometimes appears. Some say he leaned against the wall looking very cross and twirling his black mustache. Others report that he is clean-shaven and vanishes the minute anyone spots him. There are other weird things at Leftys. People claim that glowing red eyes from the fireplace seem to be glaring at them. It's guessed that the eyes belong to the angry spirit of someone Jean left behind to guard his treasure. In other rooms, lights seem to turn themselves off and on, and people say that at times unseen hands have tapped them on the shoulder. New Orleans is not the only place where Jean's ghost hangs out. Some claim to have seen it at a plantation house outside of a town. And his ghost has also been spotted in places along the Texas coast. Everyone agrees that Jean really gets around. Arna's ghost. Restaurants in New Orleans have their share of strong-willed ghosts. Arnaud Cazenave was a Frenchman who owned a popular restaurant called Arnaud's. Arnaud was always very strict with his staff. He demanded the best, and it paid off. Years after his death, Arnaud's remains one of the most popular restaurants in town. When Arnaud died, some really strange things began to happen. If waiters put forks, knives, or napkins in the wrong place, They would later find the utensils back in their proper order. Bartenders claimed that during the night someone seemed to tidy up the bar, and once when a bookkeeper was working alone around midnight, an icy blast of air blew through the bar. The man, who was usually very calm, ran out of the door as fast as he could. Some cooks say they still feel Arnold's presence hovering around as they cook. At times he appears to be smiling, but that doesn't fool them. Arnott will let them know when they've made a mistake. Le Petit Theatre du Vieux Carré. Le Petit Theatre du Vieux Carré is in an old building that has been standing since the late 17th. According to legend, it is packed full of ghosts. Sometimes the ghosts of dead actors turn up. People claim they sometimes hear piano music in the theater, but no one can trace the sound. And sometimes icy gusts of wind blow the curtains back and forth for no reason at all. The staff claims that the ghost of a well-dressed gentleman sometimes sits in the audience. They say he smells like fine pipe tobacco and expensive cologne. If the gentleman claps, the play will be a success. Actors always hope that someone will spot the gentleman ghost clapping away when the curtains go down. Other ghosts may be haunting the theater as well. There has been sightings of soldiers in Civil War uniforms wandering about the lobby. One handsome young officer likes to look at himself in the mirror. Not only does New Orleans have the most haunted bar, it also has the most haunted restaurants and the most haunted houses and theaters. No wonder people call it the most haunted city in America. If you want to read more, find out the Covenant's book for Magic Theos and Spectacle Ghosts. You will see Ghost of Honor and the scariness of honor and the brightness of honor, and you will see everything of the scary. On God of the Ghost!